It's like the 1 year anniversary of the spine pain that had taken over my life, healed, went away roughly a year ago today. And I've been meaning to, as this day approached, I've been meaning to get on here and talk about it. But I kind of wanted to see, how is my spine today? Like, what's the update today for that before I get on here? And I will give you an update. Many of you have heard this story, and so you may not want to hear it again. But I'm saying this story again. I'm speaking it again because, and I'll keep doing it actually through the years because I think it's really important for people who are suffering from diseases or illnesses or chronic pain conditions, which are perhaps unbeknownst to them the result of emotional repression, emotional issues, chronic pain. Before you hear me out, I'm going to be telling you a personal story of that pain and the healing of that pain. But I also want you to know at the offset a couple of things. One, I am not a doctor. So if you're receiving this email or this video and you're wondering who the heck is this, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not licensed in any way. I'm not here to promise to heal your pain. That is not what I do. I don't make promises to cure. What I do is I develop, along with some other fine folks, somatic-based self-inquiries that investigate the somatic experience and the unconscious mind. Um, that's the short version of that. And in that exploration, what happened is I was able to develop inquiries that lifted anger repression, fear repression, even love repression, and a repression of gender that was happening in me. I'm going to focus today on the two main ones. Most of the repression was anger and fear, repression, and some trauma. So, through the course of my own healing, these inquiries were developed, inquiries that we already had. A set of inquiries were further refined to help me. And I had no idea as I was doing this exploration a few years ago that it would end in a healing. So here I'm now just here to tell this story. So this isn't a commercial. This is me, human being, telling his story. And the reason I keep telling it is because I think something fairly miraculous happened. People with my condition, I have several conditions. Well, before I get to that, a little bit disconnected this morning. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not making a promise to cure. That's not what I do. I guide people through inquiry is what I do. And I show them how to explore on their own potential repressions and issues that are creating suffering in their life. That's what I do. Um, yeah, so in addition to that, what I'm not saying is that if you're here, I can cure your back pain. And so just listen to me. And no, it's more about telling the story because in telling the story, I think what happens is that people start to resonate with the how I'm telling it and what I'm saying about my own pain and how it developed. And I think then they may become curious as to their own experience and may become interested in using some of these tools that I use to deal with my issue. My chronic pain started when I was age 20, actually. So up at at age 19, I had a fairly normal spine. Like if you could, I couldn't feel my spine. That's a normal, healthy spine is one where you can't feel it really. It's just like you don't focus on your elbow or anything. You don't really have any fixation with it. It doesn't stand out. By the way, right now, after excruciating few years of pain, my spine feels as good or better than it did when I was 19, which defies medicine, truly. When I was age 19, so when I turned 20, I, I had already been through some ferocious bullying, which becomes relevant to this story. When I was in sixth grade, I was on the receiving end of being bullied by my group of closest friends. We were all athletes, very like top of the line athletes, starters in basketball, leaders of the track and field team. Every sport, these five people, me and these other four, kind of dominated all the sports. Um, But slowly they began to learn that I was gay, just picking up cues from me. And the ringleader then got all of them to turn against me and ferociously bullied me for 3 months solid. Chased me, hit me, called me names, ignored me. Very mean, very rude. Worst kinds of bullying you can think of, up to violence. So that was a really important early event. But let me flash forward to age 20. Age 20, I had already started experimenting with drugs as a way to deal with that trauma of being bullied, although I didn't know that at that time. Age 20, one night, I think it was the second time that I was going to try ecstasy. The first time I tried ecstasy, and that's what we called it back then. We may call it something different now. Something close to MDMA. The first time I took it, I think I was 16 and not much happened. Now, the second time I took it, age 20, I remember there was quite a few people at that party, and some of them were fairly close to me, and some of them were just kind of friends/acquaintances. I remember before I took the ecstasy, a very strong thought came that said, I am not going to open up to these people. So I already decided before taking the drug, and in fact, I had been repressing that love for a long time because of the bullying. I've been repressing getting close to people, friends. So it's like I remember even consciously suppressing that night, let alone all the repression of whatever from the trauma. That night, there was a specific thought, I'm not going to open up to these people. Now, I didn't know the impact of that, and I didn't open up to those people. I took ecstasy, and I held everything in. And that was the beginning of a journey of more drug use. And as a result of pain that I developed right after taking the ecstasy, the next day, I don't think I've told this version of the story completely. I've told the version where I started having pain at age 20. It was a freak type thing. I took this medicine. I remember having the thought, I'm not going to open up, having a thought of suppression of emotion, very strong thought. I'd already been repressing emotion. Apparently, something happened with that medication, and right after I developed an irritating but tolerable pain in the back of my neck or between my shoulder blades. And it's the kind of pain that it was strong enough to take me out of competitive swimming. So I had been a competitive swimmer since I was 6 years old and very good at it, actually. And I was in college at that time. I think it was my second year of swimming. And the pain came with dizziness, vertigo, and tremors in my arms. And I had to quit swimming because the symptoms were so, even though they were manageable and tolerable, they were enough that it made working out and physical activity challenging. So I set on a course to cure that early on. And I went to many doctors back then, including all the way to Mayo Clinic. My mom flew me to Mayo Clinic. She went with me. This is after going to a ton of other doctors. So here I felt like I was going to the best. And when I got there, they told me, you have atypical migraine headaches, which is basically a way of saying we have no idea what's going on with you. It's atypical, but you clearly have something going on. I became addicted to painkillers right after that because nobody was giving me the answers. I didn't have any answers. Nobody told me, hey, this is what it is and we can cure it. Nobody said, I can go in with a knife or a laser. They said, here, what do you need? And they gave me painkillers. And that was back in the day when doctors didn't watch closely how or how much they're prescribing painkillers. The painkillers, yes, took care of the pain, but more than that, they covered up a lot of emotional pain, including trauma, the effects of the trauma that I experienced and just growing up gay. It seemed like when I took painkillers, socially, I could just come alive. I felt comfortable in my skin. I could talk to people. I didn't feel as repressed. So, because there's such benefit to it, at least I thought, I went on a 14-year binge, you could say, for painkillers. And at certain times, at the end, actually, I was taking 8 to 10 painkillers at a time every 4 or 5 hours, sometimes every 3 hours. I could tell you stories about how bad the addiction was, but it was incredibly bad. And so then I got clean and sober in 2004, went to a 12-step program. And what I noticed is once I got off the painkillers had made the pain worse. And once I got off of those, went into sobriety, recovery, the pain was tolerable for many years in recovery. It was still there, but tolerable. In 2015 and 2016, the pain started to amp up more and more. And by the time it was 2017, I had a very, very, very painful spine. At times, it was debilitating, the pain. On almost every day, it was bad. But sometimes it was like ferociously debilitating. I've told the story of like being in my RV. My husband and I lived in an RV during that time. And I was in the kitchen one night and the pain was I was standing there and the pain was so intense that I had my hands like this, but I couldn't move them. And I really couldn't even move my head. And I couldn't take a step. And I couldn't even yell at my partner who was only 15, 10 feet away in the RV. I couldn't pick up the phone. The pain was so intense and so debilitating that it went to that level. There were times that I became suicidal, legitimately suicidal, like with a plan. Um, so this was life-changing condition. And for the first 2 years of the onset of that more severe chronic pain, the work that I had put into the world, the Killaby inquiries, I didn't seem to have a way to use those inquiries to help. I didn't, in other words, the tools that we had developed up until that point just were not sharp enough. If you think about just as a metaphor, a knife that isn't sharp enough to cut into something. It's like our tools, for me, they weren't sharp enough. And yet they were sharper than many of the other methods out there. People told us this all the time. But they weren't designed to meet emotional repression. So I began to read about emotional repression and the link between emotional repression and trauma on one hand and the manifestation of disease and chronic pain on the other hand. So there's been a slew of scientific studies. I don't know if you know this. They've been coming out for 10 years or more. And it's not just one isolated study. I have a whole compendium of different studies from different universities and labs across the world, actually, who are studying the link between these two things. And they're finding a direct link, which does not mean what it used to mean. So we used to say that stress makes disease worse. That's not what they're saying now. They're saying things like trauma, emotional dysregulation, and emotional repression actually can become major contributing factors to the onset of these diseases. So now we're talking more about causation or how something develops. So reading all of that, including mostly Dr. John Sarno's work. So by some, he's considered the rock star of chronic pain. And I think that he deserves that title. Because Dr. Sarno broke from his colleagues who were kind of treating people in the orthodox way. This is physical pain, let's treat it with medical treatments or medication or whatever. He broke free from them and started to treat it from the standpoint of this is a mind-body issue. So in other words, the system represses anger and fear and other things, or has unresolved. He didn't mention a lot about unresolved trauma, but that plays into it. You'll come to see if you do this work. He focused a lot on repression, and he had a much higher success rate than any one of his colleagues, for sure. And his success rate was double checked by researchers. There's some evidence of that they actually went into his files to double check, and it was in fact true. Had a much higher success rate. So something in his books really spoke to me, especially the part about the mind and body being inseparably connected. So how impossible it would be to develop something just physically without the mind being involved. And the way that he lays it out, I think, is much more articulately than I ever could, about how he shows that many of these chronic pain situations, things that you hear every day, like arthritis and a whole list of other conditions, he says they have a root many times in emotional repression. And the way that he sort of proves that is interesting, because he'll talk about each condition. He'll say, you can see by the nature of this condition, it can't produce by itself this strong pain signal, that something else is going on. Or he'll say, people report that their pain shifts from this area of the body to that area of the body. If the pain is located to a physical abnormality, why is it shifting around? And a lot of other arguments. So he didn't give his method away. I don't think anybody knows exactly what John Sarno was doing with people, but here I thought, we have the Killaby inquiries. We already have these really amazing tools of self-inquiry. I thought maybe we just need to develop them further, or I need to. There's a lot more to this story. For the 2 years that I wasn't able to use the inquiries on my pain because we hadn't developed it yet, um, and I was resistant to it, which maybe I'll explain later. For those 2 years, I took a very conventional approach to my pain, not unlike anyone would. So, I went through Feldenkrais, somatic movement, yoga, various forms of yoga, and other movement, back inversion table, all sorts of really well thought out stretching and posture. Worked with a posture expert twice, series chiropractor, had surgery. Surgery failed. Pain was worse after the surgery. Medical treatment after medical treatment, epidurals, things injected into my spine, things that vibrated, spinal cord type stimulation devices. Nothing gave me any sort of lasting relief. At the most, I would get some minimal relief. I took many medications through that period of time. After surgery, for a week, I took painkillers. Then I used Xanax because it was a nerve type pain for a while. And then I moved to ketamine. And then once the thing was healed, I got off ketamine. The point is there's somewhere in that I discovered how to lift up repressed emotion. That's the big takeaway here. So that's actually a big deal. And I'm not trying to say, hey, aren't I great for this? I'm trying to point to you to why that is actually a big deal in our experience, all of us. Because if you look around, this is maybe one of the biggest signs that what we've developed here could really change things. If you look around at therapies or spiritual practices, you do not see very often any methods or therapies designed specifically to bring up emotional repression. Now, they're out there for sure. Then the question is, are they effective? Do they actually bring it up? But the point is you just don't see it very often. And I think the reason is because bringing repression up is tricky, because our systems are designed to repress as a way to keep us safe and to help us survive through our childhood and our lives. So repression is not going to be something that lives easy. Otherwise, how would we have survived? So it actually cleverly, repression happens in a way that's very hidden, super hidden and unconscious, and a very powerful mechanism. Now, I know that because I made that mechanism conscious. There's a set of inquiries that we developed that literally made that previously unconscious story that I have to repress emotions conscious. It became something that I was aware of. And that's not usual, because the repression mechanism in the mind is usually very unconscious. So let's talk about that so you can see the bigger picture here. When we were kids, we didn't always feel like we were allowed to be angry or show anger or be afraid or show fear or be sad and show sadness, or even be joyful and loving and show those things freely. There were parts of ourselves that we had to hide. in order to just survive in the family or to get love or stay safe or protect ourselves. And we don't even, a lot of times, we don't even realize we're doing it. Now, I do have some very sort of conscious clients who have had a sense of it. But because of the nature of repression, we're not conscious of this. We may have an inkling. We may notice some things, but we're not directly aware of the story in our minds that we can't feel and express anger, can't feel and show fear. It happens. In other words, it's happening for those of us who repress, it's happening in every relationship after that, after the parental relationship. Once we learn how to repress, and all that happens unconsciously, like it's not something that we're deciding to do consciously as children. We're doing it as a way, as responding to relationships and events that are scary or painful. So that's our response, actually. It's not a decision. It's our response, and therefore it becomes our personality. How we respond to our parents by repressing certain emotions, that becomes the personality structure. So it's how we respond to other people later in our life is by repressing certain emotions because it worked. It worked with our parents. So it kept us safe, or it got us love, or it kept us out of trouble, or kept us from getting hit or beat. In terms of bullies like I had, it kept me safe, not showing anger and not showing fear. It allowed me to hide and stay safe, protect myself. So very unwittingly, then every relationship gets treated like that. So meeting partners, friends, coworkers, you're already in the business of repressing whatever you repress as a child. So it doesn't show up with bells and whistles. It's repressed and it shows up as your personality. This is the insidious thing about it because it is our personality. Sometimes it's too close to our personality for us to even see it. So one way it shows up, this is not the only way, is in someone who is really overtly very peaceful, who has like an ego that is a peacemaker. So some people would say, well, that's a nice ego to have. Here's what has to happen for an ego to be a peacemaker. You essentially have to agree with most people, even if you disagree, because that ego, which is something that I grew up with, that ego is very threatened by conflict. So by being agreeable, you don't have to deal with the pain, the emotional pain of conflict. So it's a protective mechanism, agreeing. People pleasing, there's a reward in it, and peacemakers often do that. They please people because that doesn't rock the boat, it doesn't bring about conflict, therefore no fear or anger has to be dealt with, and everything's at peace. People pleasing, avoidance of conflict, and generally peacemaking, agreeability, peacemaking. That's just one form. There are other forms of personalities that repress in different ways, but one of the things that the peacemaker represses is anger. So think about it. You can't be a peaceful ego and then just throw your anger out everywhere. It does not work. Personality, for that personality, does not work. Now, part of it is, and this is where there's a lot of peacemaker egos in the spiritual community. That's not speculation. I actually get the Enneagram type, the ego type, through a test for all my trainees for this work and for many of my clients. And many people show up in some form of a peacemaking ego, which has been repressing anger and to some degree fear and other things. But it's not just peacemaker egos, it's very, very systemic. Repression is very systemic. It's many of us, even if we didn't grow up with an overtly peacemaker ego, have had to repress anger or fear or something. So then here we are repressing, we humans, just doing it to survive. And then we come to spiritual practices, meditation, mindfulness. And we're told in one way or another that meditation or awakening is really about the peace that passes all understanding. Just presence is peaceful. And it is. And so I started to do the practices that help me recognize presence, like be here in the here and now, not identified so much with my story of past and future. These were incredibly liberating practices. And this is the work that I bring out to the world because it was so liberating for me. But something happened along the way, which is I was already repressing anger and other things. So this style of this method, this spirituality, helped to reinforce the repression. And this is what I'm seeing with a lot of people in the spiritual community and pretty much everywhere. But in the spiritual community, spiritual practices, methods, and teachings sometimes reinforce the peacemaker ego, therefore, they reinforce repression of anger and other repressions. So it was so solidified, the repression in my experience, that nothing was going to unearth that. It was hiding. And then when the pain started to amp up in 2017, that was anger repression and some unresolved trauma coming to the surface. But for 2 years, I couldn't and didn't know how to deal with that. So I kept going to the doctor like everybody else does. And I say to people, keep going to the doctor, even if you do this work. But what I did is I started to develop the Kilby inquiries in a way that met these repressions. So develop certain repressions. And so let me tell you about that in case you become interested in doing this work. This work is not easy, but it is more rewarding than you can ever imagine. Let me just speak because I can't promise you anything. Let me explain what I mean here. When I look up the conditions that I had for my spine, it basically says it is never going to get better, or it's very rare that it gets better, and that you should be prepared for it getting worse. So I'm in chat forums where I meet people with these conditions, and they validate exactly what these sites say about the illness, which is these folks are getting worse. And they share about it, and it's excruciating. And some of them are suicidal. Many of them are out of work. Some of them do things like hide under a table all day or stay in bed, or because it's an incredibly painful disease. But that also highlights the fact that I'm not in pain now. Instead of it staying the same or getting worse, it's healed itself. Now, when I say healed, I don't mean that the part of my condition is that it's called stenosis. So it's like the vertebrae narrows in on the spinal cord. So that's a very powerful movement in your spine to be actually squeezing on your spinal cord. That pinch, I don't even feel that anymore. So so last year around this time, the pain signal left, the nerve pain signal gone, which was miraculous in and of itself. But the pinch remained, but it wasn't really painful. It was just this pinch. And at times it would be uncomfortable, but not even really painful. So I thought the healing was done November of last year. Because once the actual pain signal goes away, it's like, what else could you expect? But the same methodology that I was using on the pain signal, I started to use it on what I would say is like a physical pinch. And over time, those tools gave the experience of it unpinching so that even the discomfort is gone. So now my spine feels like it did when I was 19. And that shouldn't have happened, according to modern science. Um, so when I'm in chat forums with people with this condition, it's so unusual the healing to happen for me that I get kicked out of these forums for mentioning that mine is healed because, and I don't even try to sell anything. None of them even know that I do work like this. I never mention it. I just mention healing, and I did it through somatic awareness. Sometimes I'll say it that way, and I've been deleted and banned and returned to these forums. I think that that's just indicative of the mindset around this disease and many of these chronic pain diseases, very, there's a mindset of like, we're doomed. There's nothing that we can do. We can just manage pain. Healing is out of the question. Healing is not out of the question. It happened for me. Now, people say, Scott, can you explain on YouTube how you did this? Can you please explain it all? No. I mean, I'll explain the general thing, but this is something you ought to know about this work. The good thing is I'll just keep to my own experience. The good thing is emotional repression lifted, and therefore the pain went away, and I got a healing. The bad thing was the emotional repression lifted. It's not really bad, but what I mean by that is, along the way, if work like this is effective, emotions that are repressed will lift. So you'll be feeling anger for a while that you haven't felt before, maybe even rage. You'll feel fear or anxiety. But that happened for me. So here I was, peaceful Scott, never really getting terribly angry and lifting the repression. It's like I could get angry. And it was incredibly liberating to be able to truly feel and express anger. But I didn't end up as a homicidal maniac from this work. Once the emotion of anger is lifted up, then it just gets dealt with through this work. So we have inquiries to help for when the anger is actually coming up. But the point is that if you do this work, that could happen for you. And there's a number of other things that you should know if you start doing this work. One is there can be incredible resistance to lifting emotional repression. Because again, it's such an integral part of our personality that when we start looking at it with this method, the resistance comes up. And the resistance is like 101 ways that the mind tries to stop doing the work. Even though you're in pain, even people in sometimes incredible pain, the mind will still stop them from doing that. Even when they see themselves getting relief in sessions, they'll still do that, still have that resistance. So if you're doing that, help and support from people who've dealt with that resistance will be priceless to you, because in the moment of resisting the work, it's almost like you start arguing in favor of your suffering, in favor of your pain, but you don't realize it. So that mind that says, no, I don't want to feel these things, these emotions that I've tucked away, I do not want to feel those. It's almost like saying, I'd rather be in physical pain with all that comes with that rather than feel the emotions that I've been repressing. Now, to your conscious mind, you might say, that doesn't make any sense. Like, no, of course I want to feel emotions and I want to be done with pain. But on an unconscious level, when we actually start looking at it, that mechanism of ego that you're not aware of until you see it comes up and says no. It's almost like, again, the mantra of that mechanism is like, I'd rather hurt myself than hurt you. In other words, I'll continue to repress emotions so that I don't hurt anyone else except myself. And then, when there's resistance, the chronic pain continues. People don't get relief. In addition to that, there are all kinds of issues that come with people who are dealing with just chronic pain, like addiction potential and suicidal ideation or depression. So what we want to do is build a forum, and that's what we're doing now, a forum where I can work with people who are doing this work and see them regularly, like support them, myself and the other facilitators of this work. So we're creating a site, as I've said, I think it's Community Circle. It's a website that has features like on any social media app. So videos where we can come on and guide you through inquiry, talk to you as you're commenting, a meeting where we all get on Zoom live or some platform like that live, interactive sessions where you learn, groups where you learn how to do this work. Just an overall support system for people going through this aspect of the work. But what we're going to do on the forum is we're going to be helping everybody. So the forum started as a way to help people doing this deep somatic work. And now it's turned into just supporting anybody doing this work. Support is so important because of the things that I've mentioned and even some things that I haven't mentioned about this. Now, if you're contemplating, do I want to do this work? Let me share a little bit more about my experience. I thought my life was over. So during the time of the worst pain, the idea that I was going to go on in this life, in this form, and do anything or even enjoy life ever again was almost out of the question completely. This was a debilitating disease. This was not like a sore elbow or I wasn't like a bad back, like my bad back. Not downplaying that. Not downplaying that. Because I know that pain is pain. What I'm saying, it was like very excruciating nerve pain. So the fact that I had to feel some emotions in order to heal from that is of no consequence to the overall healing. It is simply of no consequence. That is a mind that says that is a mind that's operating on really baseless fear. Because if you're really devoted, I was really devoted to this process. And when you're in a lot of pain or you're experiencing some other manifestation of this repression, something that's painful or some illness or something, when I got to the rock bottom, feeling anger was no obstacle. It was no obstacle at all. Feeling fear. Now, I'll tell you, in certain moments, my mind would say, I don't want to feel this. Of course, it would say that. But in actually feeling it, it was liberating because this is old emotion that wasn't available. So when it came to the surface, even though it was uncomfortable, deep down it was so exhilaratingly liberating to finally be able to feel that. And so in addition to the healing of the pain, some wonderful other byproducts are, for me, a feeling like just fully being myself and no longer having to hide certain things, certain emotions. And in relationship, that translates to much more open, honest, intimate, compassionate, loving communication and interaction. Because when you're repressing things, when we tendency to, if we repress one thing like anger, other things are easily repressed, even love, joy. So as you bring these things out of repression, it's just opening you up in ways that you were shut down before in relationship. So in addition to be able to just speak more spontaneously, so I used to hold back some. Now I can just speak without fear of what people would say, and that happens even in close relationships. Um, it's incredibly liberating and it feels good. I mean, obviously, it feels better now that there's not pain, but I mean, even beyond that, like when you work with these repressions or these traumas, they're like emotional congestion. It's like a certain area of your body, the energy is congested and there's no flow of energy. So lifting that repression, the energy just flows, and that's a very pleasant, sometimes even blissful, but most of the time peaceful and pleasant experience of the body. I could only say it's like being able to be more fully yourself, unapologetically, is how it feels. Not caring what other people think, and I didn't have a strong story about that before, except that I had a story that if I get angry at them, then they will attack me or not love me. That was there, that part of that. And so that's gone. But see, all I was interested in was getting rid of the pain. I wasn't looking for all these other benefits, but they were there. If you are contemplating doing this work, I'm going to ask you a few things here, and I want you to seriously contemplate this. Are you willing to devote your life for a few months to this work? Are you willing to take this very seriously so that if we work together in any capacity, you will actually do the inquiries on your own? Like, have a practice that you regularly do, can you promise me that? Because if you don't do that, it brings up issues. The healing can be very slow if there is one. And the support is just not there. You're not supporting yourself if you don't use the practice every day for a while. And so we need the kind of self-support while we're doing this. So do you have that in you that you can devote some time each day, like a half an hour, at least half an hour each day? If you can do that and you have already some sense that your pain or your illness is connected to emotional repression or trauma, then you're definitely a candidate. But if you're someone who, even at the outset, says something like, nah, this is all woo woo, this is my pain is physical, for example, my question to you is, are you willing to look at that belief system, that it's physical? Because if it's not physical, if it's wholly emotional or even in large part emotional, your belief that it's physical is an argument in favor of keeping your pain. If it's not in fact physical, you're arguing in favor of being in pain for many years to come, potentially. So my question is, are you open? Before you get excited and reach out to us, are you open? Have you suffered enough? Because sometimes if the repression in our lives hasn't really manifested in any real pain, like physical pain, illness, relationship issues, something that's causing suffering, will you be even motivated to do this? Because the repression serves you well. See, the repression of emotion has served you in relationship. It's kept you safe, apparently. That's what the mind says. It's not real. But the mind has all these stories about this is how you get love and whatever else. So if the pain isn't great enough, what will motivate you to lift these emotions? It's a good question to contemplate. So I'm not just saying come one, come all. Not at all. I don't want a bunch of people coming. I want people coming that have heard these last questions and can earnestly say, I'm ready. I'm tired of suffering. I don't want to be in physical pain anymore. I don't want to hurt myself just so I don't hurt others. If you're interested, reach out to us at killaby.com. That's my site. At the top of that page, you'll see a scroll down menu. And that scroll down menu shows you a thing called Find a Facilitator. Click on that, and you'll see the facilitators that I work with and that work with people. The facilitators with a green check mark are the ones that are working skillfully with people on these repressions. So those are the people that you would want to choose if you want to work one-on-one. If you don't want to work one-on-one, or even if you do, come to our new platform. It's going to happen like early in December. And start to learn how to do the work that way and get supported that way if you're interested. I do recommend sessions for everyone that's working with this at first, and then being supported on the forum. But if for whatever reason you can't do sessions, then being supported at the forum would be the next step. If you cannot, the forum will cost a certain amount, like $20 a month. If you can't afford that and you can't afford sessions, at least reach out to me, because there are some times when we do some programs that help people like that. But I would also seriously consider, because we can't help everyone, we can't scholarship everyone. If you don't have some time and money investment in this, it's going to be hard for you, because it requires a good deal of time investing in this. And to have sessions, you have to be able to pay for those folks who are helping you, because this is how they pay their bills. I'm just being very honest with you. Before you embark on such an endeavor, really look at all of these questions. And if you're still interested, go to our site. Meet through a call. You can meet me or one of the facilitators and talk about this and decide if it's right for you. One last thing I want to say is, this work on repression and trauma came about as a on the process of non-dual awakening and embodiment. You may or may not know what that is, but we are not people out here who are trying to treat diseases. That's not what we do. We don't see if we can treat addiction, or we're not treating anything. We discovered this through the process of our own awakening experience. So another awakening meaning waking up out of all this suffering in the mind and living in presence. And in that process, what happened for me is dealing with this pain was just part of that process. Why is that important? So that you could understand that this is not therapy. We are not doctors. This is a spiritual methodology. And that's what it is, and it will always be. So we want to make sure that you understand you're not. We actually even encourage you, if you're working with a therapist or a doctor, continue. Please form a team that just includes us, but doesn't exclude people that you're working with. All right. If it sounds interesting, get a hold of us, kilby.com, drop down menu,